My name is Tessa Whitmore, and by the time I blew out the candles on my 32nd birthday, I had unknowingly financed a phantom mortgage. For 8 long years, I handed my parents $2,400 every single month to rent out my childhood basement. They swore up and down it was just the fair market rate. They looked me dead in the eyes and said they desperately needed the financial help to keep up with the house payments. And I bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. Because when you're a daughter, you trust your parents. That illusion shattered last month during a mundane trip to the mailbox. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Brennan, caught my eye over the fence. She gave me this warm, crinkly smile and said, "Your mom and dad must be walking on air, finally owning this big place free and clear." I gave her a polite, confused nod. "Free and clear? What do you mean?" "The mortgage, sweetheart," she said gently. They paid it off completely back in 2014. A ringing sound started in my ears. 2014, that was an entire calendar year before I moved into that basement and started handing over my paychecks. I did the mental math right there on the sidewalk. 8 years. Multiply that by $2,400 a month. That was $230,400. I had poured nearly $250,000 into a debt that had already been erased. That very evening, I picked up the phone and hired a forensic accountant. What he uncovered didn't just trace the path of my stolen money. It illuminated exactly who in my family had orchestrated the entire scam. To understand this betrayal, you have to understand the beige colonial house I grew up in. Nestled in Bryn Mawr, a pristine Pennsylvania suburb where the hedges are trimmed to perfection and family dysfunction is swept under expensive Persian rugs. To the outside world, the Whitmores were the picture of upper-middle-class stability. My dad, Richard, was a retired mechanical engineer. He was a man who only communicated in rigid, unbending facts. My mom, Diane, was a stay-at-home mother who wielded emotional manipulation like a master swordsman. And then there was my older sister, Meredith. 3 years my senior, golden-haired, unshakably arrogant, and the absolute center of gravity in our household. In the Whitmore ecosystem, Meredith was the prized thoroughbred. I was the consolation prize. I remember a specific dinner when I was 17. I had just proudly placed my college acceptance letter on the dining table, a solid offer covering 50% of my tuition. My dad barely glanced at it before clearing his throat to make his own announcement. "Meredith just secured a full academic scholarship," he declared. I stared down at my rapidly cooling dinner. "That's amazing," I murmured. "I got half my tuition covered. So we both got something." He didn't even look up from his meal. Meredith got 100%. It wasn't until a decade later that I learned the truth about that night. Meredith never earned a dime in scholarship money. My parents secretly footed the bill for her entire education. They fabricated the scholarship story for one specific reason: to ensure I knew my place at the bottom of the totem pole. Meredith was an asset to be cultivated. I was a burden to be managed. My mom's tactics were quieter but left deeper scars. "You bruise too easily, Tessa," she would sigh whenever I showed a shred of emotion. "The real world isn't going to swaddle you in bubble wrap the way we do." She spoke about basic parenting, like providing a roof and groceries, as if it were a monumental act of charity. By the time I packed my bags for college, my worldview was utterly warped. I genuinely believed I was indebted to them simply for drawing breath. I felt inherently inferior to my sister, convinced I was the difficult child who required too much effort to endure. I had no idea that psychological conditioning was going to cost me $250,000. Fast forward to May 2015. I walked across the graduation stage with an accounting degree and a crushing $42,000 in student loan debt. I fired off 63 resumes, got exactly 4 interviews, and landed a single job offer. It was an entry-level accounting gig at the Horizon Community Foundation. After Uncle Sam took his cut, I was bringing home roughly $38,000 a year, which translated to about $2,600 a month. "You should just move back into the house," my mom coaxed over a phone call. "You can aggressively pay down those loans and build up a nest egg." Logically, it was a flawless plan. Renting an apartment in the Philadelphia metro area would bleed me dry. The house had a finished basement with a private entrance. I'd have my own space, and I could finally get ahead financially. But when I showed up with my cardboard boxes, my dad was waiting for me at the kitchen island. "Just to be clear," he said, folding his arms, "this isn't a halfway house." He pushed a crisp, freshly printed document toward me. It looked like a legally binding lease. Right at the top, bolded, $2,400 a month. "That is the standard market rate for a unit this size in this zip code," he stated. I felt all the blood drain from my face. "Dad, that leaves me with $200 a month. That's essentially my whole paycheck." "Then it's time you figure out how to budget your lifestyle," he countered coldly. "We still have a heavy mortgage hanging over our heads, Tessa. Did you think a roof was a free handout?" My mom materialized behind me, placing a gentle, suffocating hand on my shoulder. "We are doing you a massive favor, honey. You won't find a landlord who cooks you dinner every night. Strangers don't fold your clothes for you." For the record, she never did my laundry. I hauled my own baskets to the basement washer every week. But the old conditioning kicked in, and the words died in my throat. I picked up the pen and signed my name. I immediately logged into my banking app and authorized a recurring electronic transfer. On the first of every month, $2,400 vanished from my account. I even typed rent into the memo line every single time. I promised myself it was a fleeting phase. 12, maybe 24 months tops. Just long enough to dent the loans and escape. 8 years passed, and I was still sleeping underground. Every solitary electronic transfer I had ever made was meticulously logged, time-stamped, and sitting in the cloud. I had absolutely no clue how explosive that digital paper trail was about to become. Over those 8 years, my life moved forward in a blur of routine. I put my head down at the foundation. I climbed the ladder from an entry-level desk jockey to a senior accountant, and eventually earned the title of finance officer. My income swelled to $72,000. I became an expert in tax compliance, grant regulations, and deep dive audits. But my basement rent? It never budged. In fact, when I nervously asked my dad if we could renegotiate the rate, he scoffed. "Have you looked at the inflation numbers? You should be kissing my feet that I haven't hiked it up." Meanwhile, my sister's life was a highlight reel. Meredith passed her exams, secured her CPA license, worked at a mid-tier firm, and eventually launched her own independent practice. Soon after, she closed on a gorgeous, sun-drenched condo right in Center City. The deposit? Fully funded by the Bank of Mom and Dad. "Meredith grinds so hard," my mom gushed. She earned a little boost to get her life off the ground. I was 30 years old. I had surrendered over $200,000 to my parents. I slept in a subterranean room where the only natural light came from a window staring directly into a muddy drainage trench. Yet, Meredith was the one who deserved a boost. The financial drain wasn't even the deepest wound. It was the suffocating silence. I wanted to shatter the plates in the kitchen. I wanted to scream in their faces, demanding to know why I was being bled dry at market rates while my sibling received massive real estate handouts. But the moment the anger bubbled up, a familiar, icy terror gripped my chest. What if they cut me off completely? What if I became an orphan in my own family? So, I bit my tongue. I watched the auto drafts leave my account. I brainwashed myself into believing that enduring the pain was the ultimate proof that I was a dutiful daughter. The dam finally broke on a lazy October Sunday. I was scrolling through Instagram when I paused on a post from Meredith. It was a perfectly filtered photo of her living room. The caption read, "2 years thriving in my little sanctuary. Beyond blessed and grateful to Mom and Dad for making this dream a reality." 2 years. My parents had been floating her luxury lifestyle for 24 months, completely free of charge, all while simultaneously extracting $2,400 from me every 30 days. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. Something deep in my core simply snapped shut. 3 weeks later, I packed up my life and signed a lease for my own modest apartment. Which brings us to October 15th. It had been 6 months since I escaped the basement, but the umbilical cord of guilt was still attached. My mom had bombarded my phone all week, whining about the autumn leaves clogging their gutters, complaining that my dad's lower back couldn't handle the ladder anymore. So, like the trained dog I was, I drove over to do their chores. I was knee-deep in dead foliage when Dorothy Brennan shuffled up to the chain-link fence. She was 72, with her snowy hair pinned up tightly, clutching a weathered green watering can. "Tessa, feels like ages since I've seen you," she called out. "Hi, Mrs. Brennan." "Just trying to help them maintain the yard," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. She offered that sweet, wrinkly smile. "Your mom and dad must be walking on air, finally owning this big place free and clear." I froze, the gardening trowel slipping from my grip. "Free and clear? What do you mean?" "The mortgage, sweetheart," she laughed gently. "They paid it off completely back in 2014. Your dad threw a massive barbecue for the whole street to celebrate. I remember it vividly because my Harold was still with us, and he joked that we needed to catch up and pay ours off, too." The blood rushed out of my extremities. "Mrs. Brennan, are you absolutely positive it was 2014? "Oh, heavens yes. Spring of 2014. Your father was waving the bank documents around the patio. Kept shouting it was the greatest afternoon of his life." I forced a polite smile. I mumbled some kind of farewell. I honestly can't recall my exact words because my brain had turned into a terrifying calculator. Spring 2014. The house was theirs. I signed my lease and handed over my first check in June of 2015. The moment I unlocked my apartment door that night, I threw open my laptop. I went straight to the Montgomery County Public Property Database. It's completely free, entirely accessible to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection. I typed in my parents' address, and there it was, glaring back at me in stark black and white. Mortgage satisfied. Recorded date, April 12, 2014. 0 outstanding liens. 0 debt. The house was fully owned. For 8 consecutive years, my flesh and blood had systematically siphoned $2,400 from my bank account every month to service a debt that was entirely fictional. $230,400. I sat in my pitch-black living room for hours, letting the gravity of the betrayal sink into my bones. Then I picked up my phone. My first call was to Lucia. We had been inseparable since college orientation, and she was now a razor-sharp paralegal at a prominent Philly family law firm. "Okay," Lucia said, her voice dropping an octave after I laid out the facts. "Let me process this. They extracted rent for nearly a decade specifically for a mortgage that didn't exist. Correct. And they never breathed a word of it." I heard her let out a long, slow exhale. "Tessa, this isn't just toxic parenting. This crosses into tax fraud territory." I blinked at the wall. "Wait, what?" "Rental income," she explained. "If your parents raked in $250,000 in rent from you, they are legally obligated to declare every penny of it to the IRS. And if they hit it..." She let the sentence trail off into heavy silence. "But I'm their kid. Does the IRS really care? A financial transaction is a financial transaction. The government does not care if the tenant shares your DNA. Let me give you a phone number." The name she texted me was Marcus Webb. He was a veteran forensic accountant whose bread and butter was dismantling messy family financial disputes. 3 days later, I was sitting across from him in his King of Prussia office. Marcus was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with wire-rimmed reading glasses and a voice that sounded like smooth velvet over gravel. I pushed a massive, groaning binder across his desk. 8 years of bank statements, I told him. Every single transaction is highlighted. Every memo line literally spells out the word rent. He flipped through the sheer volume of paperwork, stopping occasionally to jot down a note. "And the county property records?" he murmured. "Downloaded directly from the portal. The mortgage was discharged in 2014. Marcus slowly took off his glasses. He looked me dead in the eye. "Who exactly prepares your parents' annual tax returns?" The question struck me like a physical blow to the chest. "My sister," I whispered, the horrifying realization dawning on me. "Meredith. She's a licensed CPA. She's handled their filings for her entire career." Marcus rubbed his temples, letting out a heavy sigh. "Ms. Whitmore, if your parents buried this income and your licensed sister is the one who drafted and signed those returns." He paused, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. "You are holding a nuclear launch code." The engraved invitation showed up in my mailbox just 3 days later. It was obnoxiously elegant, heavy cream cardstock with shimmering gold foil. You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Meredith and Whitmore and Bradley Harrison Ashford III. Briarwood Country Club. Saturday, November 18th, 6 p.m. The Ashfords were Philadelphia royalty. Bradley Sr. was a powerhouse estate attorney managing the trusts of the city's elite. They were the type of dynasty that got written up in lifestyle magazines, and Meredith had successfully secured her spot in their bloodline. My phone vibrated violently on the counter. It was my mother. "Tessa, did you check the mail?" Holding it right now, I said flatly, "You're attending, obviously? The entire Ashford clan is flying in. We absolutely must project a picture-perfect, united family." The sheer audacity almost made me laugh. "I'll be there." "Fantastic." "Oh, one minor detail," she added, her tone shifting into that artificial sweetness. "Your father and I decided we want you to take the microphone and say a few words. You know, a sweet tribute to Meredith. Talk about how she's always been your guiding light and role model." My knuckles turned white around my phone. "You want me to deliver a speech?" "Just a quick toast. Something emotional about the bond of sisterhood." I closed my eyes and took a ragged breath. "Are you asking me to do this? Or are you ordering me?" "Tessa, please do not start with your difficult attitude. It is 3 minutes of talking. The Ashfords will be evaluating everything. We cannot have any embarrassing." "I'll do it," I cut her off. "I'll prepare a speech." "Thank you, darling. I knew you wouldn't let us down." The line went dead. I sat completely frozen on my bar stool. They actually wanted me to walk up to a podium in a room full of old money aristocrats and publicly worship the sister who had actively conspired to rob me of my life savings. They had absolutely no clue what kind of trap they were walking into. I immediately dialed Lucia. "The engagement gala is in 3 weeks. Clear your calendar." "What's my role?" she asked immediately. "You are going to be my witness." 5 days before the country club event, Marcus Webb called me at 4:47 p.m. "The dossier is complete. I need you in my office right now." I sat in gridlocked rush hour traffic, my hands leaving sweat marks on the steering wheel. By the time I pulled into his suburban office park, the sky was bruised purple and orange. Marcus was sitting at his desk, resting his hands on a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "I'll cut right to the chase," he said. "Your parents filed zero rental income from 2015 all the way to 2023. No Schedule E on the forms. Absolutely zero indication that their primary residence was generating commercial income. Even though there's a paper trail of me paying them every 30 days. Even though you wired them $2,400 every 30 days to an asset they owned free and clear." He slid a stapled packet across the mahogany desk. "But this is the smoking gun. Take a look at the preparer's signature on every single one of these filings." I looked down at the black ink. "Meredith A. Whitmore, CPA. License no. PA 87542. She knew. I breathed, the betrayal wrapping around my throat. "She didn't just turn a blind eye," Marcus corrected. "She was the engine." When a CPA signs their name on that dotted line, they are legally certifying to the federal government that they have audited the numbers and swear they are factual. If the IRS gets a whiff of this, your sister's professional license will be obliterated. I traced my finger over her confident signature. It was the exact same handwriting I saw on the lazy, obligatory birthday cards she bought me at the drugstore. "So, what is my next move?" I asked. "You can officially file IRS Form 211. It's a whistleblower report. If the government recoups the stolen tax money, they actually cut you a check for a percentage of the recovery." He leaned back in his leather chair. "Or, you take this binder and use it however you see fit. You don't need my permission. Everything inside here is sourced from your personal bank history and publicly accessible county data." I pulled the heavy folder into my lap. "The engagement party is in 5 days. And I've been requested to give a toast." 3 days before the party, my dad called me. This was deeply alarming, as he historically treated emotional communication like a disease he might catch. "Tessa, your mother mentioned you're giving a toast for Meredith." "That's the plan." There was a heavy, calculated pause. "I'm going to be delivering my own speech." Acknowledging the village it takes to build a family. Acknowledging people's contributions. Every hair on my arm stood at attention. What kind of contributions are we talking about? Just expressing gratitude to those who made this luxury event a reality, including you. Another chilling silence. We are incredibly thankful for your financial support while you relied on us all these years. Click. He hung up. My stomach dropped as the pieces snapped together. This wasn't just a speech. This was a public execution. They were going to stand in front of the Ashford dynasty and spin a narrative that I was a helpless, dependent child who had to be rescued by my generous parents, and that my rent was just me pitching in. They were preemptively building a PR campaign to ensure I forever looked like the grateful loser. 2 hours later, Meredith called. Her voice sounded thin, stretched tight like a piano wire. Hey, just touching base about Saturday. What about it? It's just... Mom and Dad can be a lot. If they say anything weird or overwhelming on the microphone, just smile and roll with it, okay? They have good intentions. A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. Do they really, Meredith? She let out a shaky breath. Listen, I know our family dynamic hasn't always been an even playing field, but this is the biggest night of my life. Can we please just survive this without you causing a scene? I am not the one planning a scene, Meredith. Okay. Good. That's good. She hesitated. See you Saturday. I hung up and texted Lucia instantly. Meredith is terrified. She just tried to do damage control on me. She knows Dad is going to say something. Lucia replied seconds later. Scared of what? I stared at the glowing screen. I don't know, but I'm going to detonate this whole thing. On Friday night, 24 hours before the event, I sat dead center on my living room rug. Marcus's forensic dossier was fanned out around me like a detective's murder board. Neon post-it notes marked the kill shots, the county property deed showing a 2014 payoff, the chronological bank ledgers, the blank Schedule E forms signed by my sister. Lucia and I had spent hours running war games. Scenario A, Dad makes a subtle, passive-aggressive dig. I take the high road, smile for the cameras, and vanish before dessert. Scenario B, Dad explicitly claims I lived off their charity. I wait until the party thins, correct him privately with the hard math, and leave with my dignity. Scenario C, total thermonuclear warfare. He tries to humiliate me publicly to elevate himself. For Scenario C, I had written a script. It was exactly 3 paragraphs long. I memorized every syllable until it was carved into my brain. It was a surgical strike of indisputable facts. I decided against bringing the physical binder. It would look unhinged. Instead, I saved high-resolution screenshots of the county deed, the wire transfers, and the tax signatures to a hidden album on my phone. Marcus was locked into my speed dial. My phone vibrated. A text from Lucia, just confirming I'm at table 7. Are you absolutely positive you want to play this hand? I looked around my quiet, modest apartment. It was small. The appliances were outdated. But it was completely, undeniably mine. There were no basement walls, no fake ledgers, no guilt trips hiding in the drywall. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I texted back. What if he behaves? What if nothing happens? She asked. I let my thumbs hover over the keyboard. If nothing happens, I read a generic toast off a napkin, eat my free steak, and never speak to them again. But if they pull the trigger, then I officially retire from being their punching bag. I barely slept a wink. But when the sun came up, my blood was ice cold. The Briarwood Country Club was a monument to exclusionary wealth. Soaring vaulted ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers that looked like upside-down wedding cakes, and an army of waitstaff gliding around in pristine tuxedos. The Grand Terrace overlooked an immaculate 18-hole golf course bathed in the fading autumn light. I wore a dark navy sheath dress. It was conservative, boring, and utterly forgettable. I wanted to blend into the wallpaper until it was my time to strike. I did a quick head count. Roughly 120 guests. The Ashford clan commanded the VIP tables at the very front. Bradley Ashford Sr. looked like a man who demanded respect without opening his mouth, broad chest, silver hair, calculating eyes. His wife, Catherine, wore a string of pearls that probably cost more than my student loans, sporting a tight, heavily practiced socialite smile. Beside Meredith stood Bradley III, looking completely oblivious to the fact that his fiancée was sweating through her designer gown. My parents ambushed me the second I walked through the double doors. "Tessa." My mom's smile stretched across her face like a rubber band. "You look acceptable. Come present yourself to the Ashfords." "Give me a second to settle in," I deflected. I glanced across the room and my stomach plummeted. Sitting at a prominent center table was Karen Ostrowski, my boss, the executive director of my company. Why the hell was my boss at this bloodbath? Then the math clicked. The Ashford Family Trust was one of the largest financial backers of the Horizon Community Foundation. Karen was here kissing the ring. She made eye contact and gave me a polite wave. I waved back, desperately trying not to look like a woman strapped with emotional C4. "Table 7, my mom hissed, pointing vaguely toward the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. It was the absolute Siberia of the ballroom. Not seated with the relatives, not mingling with the elite. Shoved in the back with the plus ones. "Understood," I said. I navigated the maze of tables and dropped into my chair. Lucia was already working on a massive glass of Cabernet. She gave me a subtle nod. The look in her eyes said, "Lock and load." Dinner was a blur of clinking silverware and pretentious small talk. I systematically chewed my filet mignon, keeping my eyes locked on the head table. At exactly 8:15 p.m., the sharp ringing of a silver spoon tapping against crystal shattered the ambient noise. The room fell dead silent. My dad was standing proudly at the podium, grasping the microphone with one hand and a flute of champagne in the other. He looked like the king of the world. "Good evening, everyone. I want to personally thank all of you for gracing us with your presence tonight to honor Meredith and Bradley." The room erupted in polite, manicured applause. Phones went up to record. "Diane and I have been incredibly blessed to raise two distinctly wonderful daughters." He paused. I could feel the atmospheric pressure in the room shift. Meredith, as we all know, is a force of nature. A high school valedictorian, a brilliant CPA, and now she is bringing her light into one of the most respected families in the state of Pennsylvania. More applause. Meredith looked like she had swallowed a flashlight, beaming at the crowd. But my dad continued, his voice taking on a synthetic layer of patronizing warmth. "I also want to take a moment to shine a spotlight on our youngest, Tessa." My posture locked into place. For the past 8 years, Tessa has been living under our roof. And during her extended stay, she has chipped in to help keep the lights on. He flashed that terrifying, familiar smile. The one he always wore right before he twisted the knife. We are deeply moved by her financial contributions. Her little rent payments allowed our household to stay afloat during trying times. I could physically feel the collective gaze of the ballroom swinging toward table 7. The pity in their eyes was palpable. "Oh, look at the tragic younger sister. Still trapped in her childhood bedroom, kicking in a few bucks to help her aging parents." But he wasn't finished. As Tessa knows better than anyone, being a family requires sacrifice. And we pray that her spirit of giving back will continue, especially as we empty our accounts to send Meredith off into her glamorous new chapter. He hoisted his champagne glass toward the ceiling. "To family." "To family," the crowd echoed back. I remained frozen in my chair, my hands neatly folded in my lap. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Bradley Sr. staring intently at my parents. His eyes were narrowed. He wasn't clapping. "Tessa," my dad commanded into the microphone, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We would be honored if you came up here to share some memories of your sister." 120 heads swiveled in my direction. I let a slow, practiced smile spread across my face. I stood up, smoothed out my navy dress, and began the long walk to the front of the room. As I brushed past Lucia, she lightly tapped my arm. I didn't acknowledge her. My brain was actively booting up the sequence. When I reached the podium, I slid the cold, heavy microphone from its stand. I looked out over the sea of diamonds, tailored suits, and crystal centerpieces. I locked eyes with Bradley Sr. in the front row. He was studying me with the intensity of a prosecutor cross-examining a witness. "Thank you, Dad," I began, my voice perfectly modulated. Years of presenting financial audits to a board of directors had built my armor. And thank you to the Ashford family for hosting such a breathtaking evening. I let a heavy, dramatic pause stretch over the room. My father just stood here and brought up my financial contributions to our family. He's absolutely right. I have contributed. I offered the crowd a soft, disarming smile. For exactly 8 years, I paid my parents $2,400 a month in rent to live in their unfinished basement. A quiet, confused murmur washed over the tables. For those of you doing the mental arithmetic, I continued smoothly. That comes out to a grand total of $230,400. I glanced at my dad. His smug smile had frozen, slowly cracking at the edges. I signed over my paychecks because my parents sat me down and told me they were drowning under the weight of their mortgage. They assured me $2,400 was fair market value, and because I loved them, I believed them implicitly. My mother's face had drained of all color. She looked like a ghost draped in chiffon. However, I recently stumbled upon a fascinating piece of information. I dropped my tone into a casual, conversational register. According to the Montgomery County Public Property Database, which is legally accessible to every single person in this room via their smartphone, my parents fully discharged their mortgage in April of 2014. Dead, horrifying silence blanketed the ballroom. You could have heard a napkin drop. That date, I said, letting the words echo, was an entire calendar year before I ever moved into that basement and paid my first month's rent. I watched the shockwave physically ripple through the affluent crowd. Jaws tightened. Whispers broke out. I did not take this microphone to sabotage a celebration, I said, projecting my voice to the back wall. I am saying this because my father just publicly insinuated that I am a dependent who owes this family my lifelong servitude. And I simply want the record corrected in front of his new in-laws. Suddenly, the screech of a metal chair violently pushing back pierced the quiet. Bradley Sr. was on his feet. He didn't even need a microphone to command the massive room. Are you standing there testifying that you remitted over $200,000 to your parents for a property that carried zero debt? That is exactly what I am saying, I replied. And you possess the empirical evidence to back that up? I have 8 years of bank ledgers. Every single wire transfer is chronologically time-stamped with the word rent in the memo line. Bradley Sr. slowly turned his head. He looked at my dad. He looked at my mom. Then his eyes locked onto Meredith. The oxygen in the room had officially been vaporized. My father suddenly lunged forward and ripped the microphone from my grip. Tessa, what the hell is wrong with you? He hissed into the mic, his voice cracking with panic. This is your sister's engagement. This is a sacred night. My mom practically sprinted onto the stage, waving her hands at the audience like she was shooing away a bad smell. Please forgive her. She is highly confused. She's been suffering from severe mental breakdowns at work. The stress has made her delusional. You all know how millennials are. I am not confused, Mom. I didn't need a mic for my voice to carry over hers. And I am not suffering from a breakdown. I am a licensed finance officer. I read data for a living. I know exactly what fraud looks like. This is private family business, my dad bellowed, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson. You are making a fool of yourself. You took a private matter public. No, I didn't, I countered, refusing to break eye contact. You took the microphone and tried to publicly humiliate me. I am simply providing the crowd with the omitted variables. From her seat at the head table, Meredith finally found her voice. It was trembling violently. Tessa, how much alcohol have you consumed tonight? I almost burst out laughing. I've had exactly 4 sips of a Pinot Grigio. Feel free to interrogate the bartender. Richard. Bradley Sr.'s voice sliced through the screaming match like a meat cleaver. He was standing perfectly straight, his arms crossed over his chest. If the allegations your daughter is making hold true, if you illegally collected untaxed residential rent on a fully owned parcel, that ceases to be private family business. That is a massive federal disclosure violation. My dad began stuttering uncontrollably. Brad, listen to me. It's a massive misunderstanding. The house had overhead, maintenance, surging utility costs. Bradley Sr. raised a singular, perfectly groomed eyebrow. $230,000 in basic utilities? Do not insult my intelligence. My mom pivoted back to the whispering crowd, her eyes wide and manic. She has been consumed by jealousy since the day Meredith was born. This is a spiteful, calculated attack. Diane, enough. Catherine Ashford, Bradley's wife, had stood up now. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, absolute ice. I believe this spectacle needs to be moved behind closed doors immediately. I took 3 steps backward, stepping off the carpeted stage. I'm finished anyway, I said evenly. I just refused to let the lie go unchallenged. As I turned to walk back down the aisle, I caught a glimpse of Meredith. Her face was locked in an expression of absolute, paralyzing terror. She wasn't angry at me for ruining the toast. She was terrified because she knew what I had figured out. Quick pause before I tell you what happened next. If you have ever been backed into a corner in a room full of people who are supposed to protect you, only to watch them twist the narrative to make you the villain, you know exactly how heavy my chest felt in that exact second. If you've survived that kind of betrayal, drop a comment below. I promise you, you aren't crazy and you aren't alone. And if you want to see exactly what happened when Meredith cornered me on the dark balcony, and who is secretly listening from the shadows, keep watching. Now, here is exactly what went down after I dropped the mic. I didn't sprint for the exit. I held my head high and marched straight through the maze of tables, completely ignoring the frantic whispering echoing around me. I made a beeline for the massive glass French doors that led out onto the wraparound balcony. Lucia jumped up from table 7 and cut me off near the threshold. Are you breathing? I just need 5 minutes of oxygen, I told her. Stay inside. Keep your eyes open. I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The biting November wind whipped across my face. Below me, the sprawling golf course was swallowed by darkness, dotted only by weak amber landscape lights. I gripped the freezing stone balustrade and took a massive, shuddering breath. I had actually pulled the trigger. I had regurgitated 8 years of swallowed poison, and the sky hadn't crushed me. My phone vibrated violently in my coat pocket. It was Marcus Webb. I answered instantly. Tell me, Ms. Whitmore. I just got off the phone with an insider at the state licensing board. Marcus's voice was sharp, clinical, and completely free of emotion. Your sister didn't just passively stamp those returns. She physically designed the shell account structure. She specifically routed your monthly payments through a secondary blind account to ensure the money never touched your parents' taxable ledger. I closed my eyes and let my head fall forward against the freezing stone. She engineered it, I whispered. She was the architect. Send me the written confirmation right now. It's already sitting in your inbox. I hung up and pulled up my email. Marcus had forwarded a blistering internal memo from his forensic contact. It wasn't the final nail in the coffin, but it was enough to guarantee that if I filed a formal grievance, Meredith's CPA license would be permanently frozen pending a federal inquiry. Behind me, the heavy glass door scraped open. Tessa. It was Meredith. I slowly slipped my phone back into my pocket and turned around to face the golden child. She was standing in the dim light pouring from the ballroom windows. Her hair and makeup were still structurally flawless, but her eyes were wild, red-rimmed, and leaking mascara. Okay, I said, my voice eerily calm. Let's do this. She stepped out into the freezing wind, letting the door latch shut behind her. We were completely isolated. Meredith crossed her arms, shivering uncontrollably. What in God's name was that stunt? You mean the truth? She let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely zero joy. The truth? Are you insane? You just detonated a bomb on our entire bloodline in front of the Ashfords. In front of the wealthiest people in the city. Dad dragged me onto that stage to humiliate me. I just provided the footnotes. The footnotes. She choked on a sob, her voice dropping into a desperate, feral hiss. Tessa, do you possess even a shred of comprehension of the damage you just caused? I know down to the exact dollar what I just caused. This could destroy my firm. It could trigger a board review of my license. I tilted my head, studying her like a lab rat. Now, why on earth would the truth about Mom and Dad's rental income affect your personal accounting license? The remaining color drained completely out of her face. She looked like a corpse. You know, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You know exactly why. Because you built the labyrinth. You structured the blind accounts. You signed your name in black ink on every single tax return that legally pretended I didn't exist. That's insane. I never. The Pennsylvania State Board already has the paper trail, Meredith. Not because of me, but because someone, somewhere, flagged an anomaly in the ledger. But if this escalates... I let the threat hang in the freezing air. You cannot do this to me, she shrieked, her voice cracking in half. I am walking down the aisle. The Ashford family doesn't tolerate scandal. If they even smell an IRS audit, they will annihilate this engagement. Do you understand what you are ripping away from me? Do you understand what you conspired to steal from me? I roared back, the anger finally bursting out of my chest. $230,000. 8 years of my youth. You stole my 20s to buy yourself a luxury condo. I thought you knew, she screamed, tears freely streaming down her cheeks now. I swear to God, I thought you were in on the scam. I thought you willingly agreed to bankroll Mom and Dad. I just stared at her, utterly repulsed. I was wiring them rent money for a house they owned outright, Meredith. Does that sound like a willing participant? Or does that sound like a victim of fraud? She opened her mouth, but absolutely nothing came out. The balcony door swung open again. My parents marched outside, completely frantic. And lingering right behind them, holding the door open, was Karen Ostrowski, my boss. My dad stepped aggressively into my personal space, his face tight with controlled rage. Tessa, we are going to resolve this right now. Privately. He shot a nasty glare toward Karen at the doorway. This is internal family business. It officially stopped being private the second you handed me a microphone, I shot back. Let's all just take a deep breath and not make this uglier than it has to be, my mom crooned, layering on that sickly sweet, diplomatic tone she used when she was backed into a corner. We are blood. We can fix this together. And how exactly do you plan to fix a $250,000 theft? My dad aggressively adjusted his suit jacket. We are prepared to reimburse you a lump sum. A portion of the funds you contributed as a sign of good faith. A portion? $50,000, he stated, puffing his chest out like he was bestowing a massive charitable grant upon me. To wash our hands of this. My brain ran the calculation in a millisecond. 50 grand out of 230. Less than 22 cents on the dollar. And in exchange? I asked. In exchange, you drop this psychotic vendetta immediately. You do not speak to the IRS. You do not hire legal counsel. His jaw locked. And you absolutely never humiliate this family in public again. My mom stepped forward, reaching for my arm. Sweetheart, look at the big picture. If you decline this, you are going to rip this family to shreds. The family that charged me $250,000 in fake rent, I retorted, stepping out of her reach. It wasn't fake rent, my dad snapped. The mortgage was gone, but we had massive expenses. We needed help. Then pull up the receipts. Show me 200 grand in maintenance bills right now. Silence. Just the wind howling across the golf course. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Karen stepped fully onto the balcony, her face an unreadable mask of corporate professionalism. I sincerely apologize for the intrusion, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. But the acoustic seal on that door is terrible. I heard raised voices, and I simply wanted to ensure everyone was safe. My dad spun around, utterly offended. Excuse me, but this is wildly inappropriate. You are her employer. This has nothing to do with you. Karen didn't even blink. Tessa, do you want me to give you space, or do you need me here? I looked at my boss, and then back at the trio of monsters who raised me. Please do not leave, I said. Karen smoothly walked over and stood shoulder to shoulder with me. It was a calculated, physical demonstration of power. She was close enough to be my shield, but professional enough not to escalate. My dad's false bravado immediately fractured. Ma'am, I am telling you, this is none of your business. Actually, Tessa is my leading candidate for our vacant director of finance position, Karen replied evenly. Anything that threatens the well-being and stability of my executive team is absolutely my business. Director of finance candidate. My heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told me that yet, but I kept my face carved out of stone. I'm sorry, who exactly are you? My mom stammered, intimidated by Karen's icy authority. Karen Ostrowski, Executive Director of the Horizon Community Foundation. Karen offered a lethal, polite smile. I believe the Ashford Trust is one of our primary benefactors. Such a breathtaking event they've put together tonight. The threat was implicit and devastating. The Ashfords respected Karen. Karen was standing with me. Whatever move my parents made next was going to be directly reported to the people writing the checks. My dad nervously cleared his throat, suddenly looking like a cornered rat. We are simply engaged in a financial negotiation. Sounded a lot more like hush money, Karen noted casually. $50,000, wasn't it? To bury evidence of tax evasion. My mother looked like she was about to vomit. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, Karen added. But as I said, sound carries out here. My father opened his mouth to argue, but a deep, booming voice cut him off from the doorway. Richard. Bradley Sr. stepped onto the terrace. His wife, Catherine, stood stoically at his side. He wore the hardened, emotionless expression of a man who had spent 4 decades dismantling lives in civil court. I believe, Bradley Sr. rumbled, it is time we take this discussion into a secure room. All of us. Bradley, please, this is a minor domestic dispute, my mom pleaded, her voice shaking. No, Diane, he shot back, his tone absolute zero. It's really not. Not anymore. He slowly turned his gaze to Meredith, who was practically shrinking into the stone wall to avoid his eyes. When the woman my son is preparing to marry is actively implicated in a multi-year federal tax conspiracy, it stops being your family's problem. It becomes mine. Meredith let out a pathetic, whimpering gasp. The entire engagement was burning to the ground, and the wildest part was, I hadn't even played my trump card yet. We were quickly herded into an intimate, private dining suite off the main hallway. The door clicked shut, sealing us inside with pristine white tablecloths and untouched crystal champagne flutes. Bradley Sr. immediately took the head of the table. No one elected him judge, but no one dared challenge him either. Let's strip away the emotion and look at the anatomy of this, Bradley Sr. stated, his voice ringing with courtroom authority. Tessa, you are officially alleging that you paid your parents $2,400 a month in housing rent for 8 consecutive years. I'm not alleging it. I have the certified bank records. And the property in question carried 0 mortgage debt during this entire window? Correct. The deed was satisfied and recorded in 2014. It is public county data. He pivoted his heavy gaze to my parents. Richard. Diane. Did you file this $250,000 rental income on your federal tax returns? My dad's jaw muscles flexed aggressively. Brad, you are a lawyer. You know I don't have to discuss my private filings. It is a binary question, Richard. Yes or no? Total, deafening silence. Bradley Sr. didn't react, but I saw the calculation click behind his eyes. He slowly turned his head toward my sister. Meredith. You hold an active CPA license in the state of Pennsylvania. You have personally filed your parents' taxes for the entirety of your adult career, have you not? Meredith nodded, her throat too tight to produce a sound. Did you manually input a Schedule E for commercial rental income generated by the basement unit? It isn't a simple yes or no. Did you file it? Yes. Or no? No, she whispered. Bradley Sr. let out a long, heavy breath through his nose. He looked at his son, then at his wife, and finally back to my completely ruined parents. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, he began, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. I have dedicated 40 years of my life to estate and wealth law. I know exactly the stench of financial fraud. And I know the absolute hellfire that rains down when the IRS pulls the thread. Bradley, you are blowing this wildly out of proportion, my mom shrieked. This is a federal crime, Diane, he barked, silencing her instantly. And I am going to have to think incredibly long and hard about the kind of criminal DNA my son is tying himself to. He grabbed Bradley Jr. by the shoulder. We are going to the car. Now. They walked out. Meredith collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, looking like she might completely pass out. When I finally walked back into the main ballroom, it felt like entering a morgue. A string quartet was nervously playing in the corner, but the party had completely splintered. Groups of wealthy guests were huddled together, whispering furiously behind their champagne glasses. Every single eyeball in the room tracked me as I walked back to table 7. "Give me the casualty report," Lucia demanded instantly. Bradley Sr. took his son outside. He is actively reconsidering the marriage because he refuses to bind his family to tax felons. Lucia covered her mouth, letting out a sharp exhale. "That is the nuclear option. They built the bomb, Tessa. You just pressed the detonator." At the front of the room, my parents were entirely isolated. The Ashford dynasty's tables were completely abandoned. It was a brutal, incredibly public excommunication. A sophisticated woman in a black velvet dress suddenly appeared at my shoulder. Mid-50s, calculating eyes, expensive silver jewelry. "Excuse me, you're Tessa, correct?" "I am." "My name is Sandra Holloway," she said, keeping her voice incredibly low. "I sit on the Pennsylvania Board of Accountancy. I'm also a very close, personal friend of Catherine Ashford." My blood ran cold. "I understand." "I am not speaking to you in an official capacity," she clarified, glancing around to ensure nobody was eavesdropping. "But I listened to your speech. And I feel obligated to tell you that if your timeline is factually accurate, your sister has dug herself into a catastrophic hole." "I didn't come here tonight to incinerate her career," I said defensively. "I know," Sandra replied gently. "But you need to understand that formal board investigations are often triggered by third-party witnesses, especially when highly influential families are dragged into the crossfire." She gave me a deeply sympathetic nod, turned around, and melted back into the crowd. Lucia's eyes were the size of dinner plates. Did a literal board director just take mental notes to pull Meredith's license? Almost definitely. Across the sprawling room, my parents were locked in a vicious, hushed argument. My dad was violently red in the face. My mom was frantically scanning the room, desperate to see who was judging them. The answer was everyone. The extravagant engagement party was dead, and the nightmare for the Whitmore family was only just beginning. I grabbed my clutch and started walking toward the coat check. I was 10 feet from the exit when my dad materialized, blocking my path. His face was distorted with a level of pure hatred I had never seen before. Behind him, the remaining guests were awkwardly sprinting for the valet line. "You are not walking out that door," he snarled. "I am entirely finished here." "Finished?" he spat, his voice cracking with rage. "You just nuked this family from orbit. You destroyed your sister's future, you torched our social standing, and for what? For your twisted version of the truth. The literal, legal truth." He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "You want to talk about the truth, Tessa? The truth is that we fed you. We clothed you. We kept a roof over your pathetic head when you were too much of a failure to survive on your own. And you charged me $250,000 for the privilege. The mortgage was gone, Dad. You looked me in the eye and lied to me for a decade." His hand lashed out, his fingers digging violently into my bicep. "Keep your damn voice down." I looked down at his white-knuckled grip on my arm. Then I looked him dead in his furious eyes. "Take your hands off me." Something in my tone, a terrifying, unfamiliar authority, pierced his rage. His fingers slowly released my arm, but he didn't back down. "You just declared war on your own bloodline," he whispered, his voice shaking with malice. "Do you comprehend that? After tonight, you're dead to us. You have no mother. You have no sister. You have no one." I stood perfectly tall, straightening my spine. "I haven't had a real family in over 10 years. I've just been paying rent to a pair of slumlords who demanded I call them Mom and Dad." His face completely collapsed. "Do not ever contact my phone again," I added. "Every single piece of communication from this second forward goes through my retained legal counsel." "Counsel," he stammered, the anger instantly replaced by legal panic. "Are you threatening to drag us into court?" I turned my back on him. I am finally protecting myself, which is what I should have done the day I graduated. Karen appeared out of nowhere, seamlessly flanking my right side. "Tessa." The valet brought my car around. "Let's go." I didn't look back at the man who taught me that love came with a monthly invoice. I didn't look at the family who measured my worth in wire transfers. I simply walked out the glass doors. When I finally stepped into the freezing November parking lot, I let out a massive, jagged breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for 8 years. The war was officially over. Or, more accurately, the real consequences were just being set into motion. 3 days after the implosion at the country club, my cell phone rang at exactly 9:47 a.m. It was an unknown 215 area code. "Hello, is this Tessa Irene Whitmore?" The voice was incredibly sharp, devoid of any warmth. "This is Agent Torres calling from the Philadelphia field office of the Internal Revenue Service." My knees gave out. I sank onto my cheap living room couch. "Yes, speaking. Ms. Whitmore, we are currently launching an official inquiry regarding suspected unreported rental income tied to a residential property located in Bryn Mawr. Our preliminary data suggests you possess critical material evidence." Panic spiked in my throat. Wait, I didn't file a Form 211. I never submitted a complaint. I could hear the scratching of a pen on the other end. "We are fully aware of that, ma'am. The whistleblower tip originated from an independent third party. However, your banking history has been flagged in our system. We need to schedule a formal interview." The second the call ended, I dialed Marcus Webb. "Marcus, I swear I didn't file the paperwork," I babbled. "Did your office submit it?" "Absolutely not. I swore I wouldn't move without your green light." He paused, the sound of typing clacking in the background. "But give me 20 minutes to make some inquiries." An hour later, Marcus called me back. "I found your mystery whistleblower." "Who?" "Dorothy Brennan. The sweet old lady next door." I let my head fall back against the couch cushions, completely stunned. "Mrs. Dot. She called my front desk last week asking for the procedural steps to report neighborhood tax fraud. I gave her the standard boilerplate runaround, warning her that federal bureaucracy is incredibly tedious." He let out a dry, genuine laugh. "Apparently, the bureaucracy wasn't tedious enough to stop a 72-year-old woman on a crusade. Mrs. Dot. The woman with the watering cans and the snowy bun. She had spent 30 years watching me grow up. She watched me carry the groceries, watched me disappear into that bleak basement, watched me slave away while my sister was treated like royalty. And when she accidentally unearthed the financial abuse, she didn't just gossip about it. She weaponized the federal government." "Are you still on the line, Ms. Whitmore?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," I croaked, furiously wiping a tear from my cheek. "I'm here." The IRS is a massive, slow-moving beast. But once it locks onto a scent, it never stops. Your parents are getting the full forensic treatment. And Meredith's signature is permanently burned into those fraudulent documents. He paused, his tone softening. "This is completely out of your hands now. In the best way possible." I thanked him from the bottom of my heart and ended the call. Sitting alone in the quiet of my apartment, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The audit officially dropped like a hammer in late January. I didn't hear it from my family. I heard it through Lucia's legal grapevine, which moved faster than the tabloids. "It is a total financial strip search," Lucia reported over iced coffees. "They're auditing 8 solid years of returns. Your parents had to retain a boutique tax defense lawyer, and rumor has it, his retainer is absolutely bleeding them dry." "What's the damage look like?" The feds slapped them with approximately $45,000 in raw back taxes, massive evasion penalties, and compounding interest. And that is purely the federal level. The Pennsylvania Department of Revenue hasn't even taken their bite yet. $45,000. It was barely a fraction of the $230,000 they had leached out of me, but it was a catastrophic blow to their precious retirement fund. "What about Meredith?" I asked, staring down at the ice rattling in my cup. Lucia's expression turned grim. The state CPA board formally issued her a letter of inquiry. The documents aren't public record yet, but she is officially under review. Is she going to get disbarred? It's highly unlikely she loses the license permanently. It's technically her first offense, and her lawyer will argue she was blindly trusting her parents' numbers. But she is absolutely going to eat a formal, permanent reprimand. Mandatory ethics rehabilitation, and 2 solid years of strictly supervised probationary practice. Lucia shrugged her shoulders. In the high-end accounting sector, a reprimand for gross negligence is the equivalent of a scarlet letter. I stared into the dark liquid of my coffee. Oh, and the Ashford wedding? Lucia added softly. Postponed indefinitely. The Ashford PR team actually leaked a statement to the Society pages about pressing private family matters requiring their focus. She reached across the tiny cafe table and grabbed my hand. How are you processing all of this? I actually had to sit and weigh the question. I dug deep into my chest to find the emotion. I don't feel a sense of joy, I finally admitted. But I don't feel gutted either. I looked up into her eyes. I just feel weightless. Like I've been carrying a boulder of guilt up a mountain for a decade, and someone finally cut the straps. I took a slow sip of my drink. I burned 8 years of my youth trying to buy my way into their hearts. I was trying to purchase a love that was fundamentally out of stock. Now, I'm just focusing on being good to myself. The wheels of the federal audit kept grinding. The social destruction kept expanding. But for the very first time in my existence, none of the collateral damage required my silence. The email bypassed my spam filter on a bleak Tuesday night. Subject: Please, Tessa. I literally cannot comprehend why you are doing this to your own flesh and blood. Your father is having heart palpitations and hasn't slept in a month. The defense attorneys are liquidating everything we saved. Meredith's dream wedding is entirely shattered, and she refuses to leave her bedroom. We gave you the world. We fed you, we raised you, we poured all our love into you, and this is the knife you stick in our backs. If there is an ounce of human decency left in your soul, you will end this. Call the IRS agent. Tell them you were confused. Tell them you lied. We can sweep this under the rug. We can be a happy family again. Please, my sweet girl. Stop destroying us. Mom. I read the digital text 3 times. The manipulation was so incredibly textbook it was almost boring. The classic narcissist playbook: weaponize maternal affection, play the ultimate victim, and wildly overestimate my power by suggesting I could call off a federal tax division like calling off a dog. I opened a reply window. I typed a sentence, deleted it, and started over. Mom. I did not file the whistleblower complaint. I possess zero legal authority to halt a federal investigation. But even if I held the kill switch, I wouldn't press it. You stared me in the eyes for 8 years and lied about drowning in a mortgage so you could drain my bank account. And when I finally confronted you with the paper trail, your first instinct was to offer me a pathetic $50,000 bribe to shut my mouth. That isn't how a family operates. That is how a criminal syndicate operates. I am not destroying your lives. I merely turned on the lights. If the truth is what destroys you, that is your own fault. Direct all further communication to my legal counsel. Tessa. I hit send. Then, with a profound sense of finality, I permanently blocked her email address. The silence that flooded my apartment afterward wasn't lonely. It was sterilized. Clean. I looked around my tiny living room. There was no basement ceiling pressing down on me. There was no father auditing my grocery bills. For the very first time, I owed absolutely nothing to anyone. And it tasted exactly like freedom. Before I keep going, I have a serious question. Have you ever been forced to hit that block button on a toxic parent? Have you ever watched the voicemails and emails stack up in a hidden folder, knowing that opening them will only drag you back into the nightmare? It is arguably the most agonizing boundary you will ever have to draw, but it is the most vital for your survival. If you are sitting in that brutal purgatory between loving your family and protecting your sanity, hit the like button right now. You are not betraying them. You are rescuing yourself. Let me tell you exactly how the dominoes fell over the next few months, starting with the wedding, the CPA board, and a message that completely shattered me. By March, exactly 4 months after the Briarwood disaster, Lucia delivered the final nail in the coffin. The Ashford wedding is permanently dead, she announced, sliding into my booth at the diner. Permanently. Bradley Sr. personally summoned Meredith to his downtown office last week. He sat her down and explicitly told her it was nothing personal against her character, but the Ashford dynasty absolutely could not survive the optics of an active IRS tax evasion probe. He commanded his son to walk away. Lucia took a bite of her toast. Word is, Bradley Jr. actually fought to keep the ring on her finger. His father completely overruled him. I waited for the rush of vindictive triumph. It never arrived. I just felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion. 3 days later, my phone vibrated with an unregistered number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Tessa. It was Meredith. Her voice was utterly hollowed out, sounding like it had been dragged through broken glass. How did you bypass my block? I asked flatly. I called Lucia's law firm. I lied and told the receptionist someone was in the hospital. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the line. Are you finally satisfied? I sank into my armchair, staring at the ceiling. No, Meredith. I am not satisfied. I am not happy. I didn't set this on fire to watch you burn. Then why? She sobbed, the sound breaking through the speaker. Because I deserved basic honesty. You sat on the truth for 8 years. You watched me bleed money into a fake account, and you never warned me. I could hear her ragged, hyperventilating breaths. I swore to God, I thought you knew, she wept, her voice fractured. I truly thought you were a willing participant. You never raised a red flag. You never fought them on the rent. I thought you were saving them. Because I blindly trusted all of you, I whispered, closing my eyes against the sting of tears. And you weaponized my blind trust to finance your perfect life. I am not going to apologize for exposing the rot. And I am absolutely not going to sit here and pretend we can tape this relationship back together. I took a deep, centering breath. I truly hope you rebuild your life, Meredith. I mean that. But I cannot be a part of the wreckage. I hung up the phone. I sat in the deafening quiet, letting the absolute finality of the moment wash over me. Some bridges catch fire and burn to the ground. Some bridges are purposely blown up because they lead straight to a trap. In April, the Pennsylvania State Board of Accountancy officially published its disciplinary rulings. Because my name was tangled in the informant records, even though Mrs. Dot pulled the trigger, I received a certified copy in the mail. Marcus Webb forwarded a digital copy just to be safe. The legal findings were devastatingly absolute. Meredith and Whitmore, CPA license PA 87542, is hereby issued a formal public reprimand for gross failure to exercise professional due diligence in the preparation of client tax filings. Findings: willful failure to report Schedule E commercial rental revenues. Willful failure to independently verify the accuracy of client financial assertions. Severe breach of professional accounting ethics. Remediation: 40 mandatory hours of intensive ethical retraining. 2 consecutive years of strictly supervised probationary practice. This reprimand will remain a permanent public notation on the state licensing database. She didn't get disbarred, but in the cutthroat financial sector, a permanent public reprimand for ethical failure is a career execution. Every corporate headhunter, every background check, every wealthy client would instantly see gross failure to exercise due diligence. Lucia called me later that night. Have you read the board decree? I have. She desperately interviewed with 3 of the Big 4 accounting firms last month. Every single one of them revoked their offers the second the background check cleared. I felt a strange fluttering in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was just the feeling of the universe finally balancing its scales. So where is she working? She landed at a tiny, strip mall firm down in Delaware, doing entry-level payroll processing. Meredith. The untouchable golden child. The fake valedictorian. The woman destined for high society. She was now punching a clock processing basic payroll in a different state. I didn't cheer. There is no elation in watching a human being hit rock bottom. But there was a profound, quiet justice in realizing that the fortress of lies my parents had built was finally reduced to rubble. Gravity always wins. The truth always breaks through the surface. After I enacted the total communication blackout, the silence from my parents was absolute. No unannounced knocks on my door, no manipulative letters slipped into my mailbox. Nothing. Thanksgiving rolled around, and my phone remained completely silent. Christmas Eve came and went without a single generic holiday card. When I turned 33 in February, the day passed without a whisper from my blood relatives. For my entire life, I had contorted my personality, my dreams, and my bank account into whatever shape I thought would finally earn their validation. The total lack of contact should have ripped my heart out. Instead, it felt like I had finally unbuckled a lead vest I had been wearing for a decade. I spent Thanksgiving completely surrounded by Lucia's loud, loving, chaotic family, with her grandmother aggressively forcing me to eat a third slice of pie. For Christmas, I rented a cabin in snowy Vermont with a group of amazing girls from the foundation. On my birthday, Lucia and I split 2 bottles of expensive red wine at a dimly lit Italian joint. "Are you holding up okay?" Lucia asked, watching me stare at the lone candle burning in my tiramisu. "I am actually doing incredibly well," I answered honestly. "You don't miss them at all?" I sat back and really chewed on that question. I miss the fantasy of them. I miss the parents I desperately wanted them to be. I leaned forward and blew out the flame. But I don't miss the monsters they actually are. "Look at you, showing massive emotional growth," she teased. "Or I'm just in primal survival mode." She raised her glass. "Same exact thing, babe." The calendar pages kept turning. The federal audit formally closed. My parents liquidated chunks of their retirement to pay off the massive government penalties. Meredith signed a lease in Delaware. The Ashford debacle faded into a legendary piece of gossip among Philadelphia's elite. And me? I just filled a life. It was a modest, quiet existence, entirely unimpressive to the country club crowd, but it was fiercely and unapologetically mine. One rainy evening in early March, I was clearing out my inbox when I spotted an email from an unfamiliar address, brennan1952@aol.com. Subject, "A little note from your neighbor." I clicked it open, my heart beating a little faster. "My dearest Tessa, I pray this message finds its way to you. Your lovely friend Lucia walked me through the steps to send an electronic mail. Technology and I are not the best of friends, I'm afraid. I am writing this because I need you to understand exactly why I picked up the phone and called the authorities. I have lived next door to your family for 30 long years. I watched you grow from a little girl into a woman. I sat on my porch and watched you sweat behind a lawnmower at 14 while your sister lounged at the country club pool. I watched you haul heavy groceries in the snow while Meredith drove off to get manicures. I watched you disappear down into that dark basement year after weary year, grinding your bones to dust while your own mother and father treated you like a disposable tenant. When I finally connected the dots, when I realized they were actively bleeding your bank account for a mortgage they had already thrown a party to celebrate paying off, something deep inside my soul simply snapped. I am 72 years old. I have witnessed unspeakable unfairness in my time on this earth. But the one thing I know for sure is that staying silent makes you an accomplice. I refuse to be an accomplice to your abuse. I kept you in the dark before I made the call because I never wanted you to carry the burden of guilt. This was entirely my decision, driven by my own conscience. You are a spectacular young woman, Tessa. You always have been. You were simply born to parents who were entirely too blind to see the treasure they had. If you ever find yourself driving through the old neighborhood and desire a cup of tea, my front door is permanently unlocked for you. I still bake a phenomenal lemon cake. All my love. ... I read the text 3 times. And then I broke down and wept. I didn't cry the way I had when I discovered the deed records. Those were violent tears of shock and betrayal. These tears were soft. They were the tears of a girl who had finally been seen. Someone had been quietly, silently bearing witness to my invisible suffering my entire life. I wiped my face and typed back immediately. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Brennan. I would be honored to come over for tea." Her reply dinged back in 20 minutes. "Splendid. This Sunday, 2 p.m. I typed back, "Yes. They say some families are bound by blood and others are actively chosen. But sometimes, your real family reaches across the fence and chooses you first." The very next Tuesday, Karen buzzed me into her corner office. I walked in fully prepared to deliver a mundane briefing on our quarterly grant compliance. Instead, she pointed at the leather chair across from her mahogany desk with a totally unreadable expression. "Close the door behind you, Tessa." I pushed it shut. "The executive board convened yesterday," she stated, lacing her fingers together. We have reached a unanimous verdict regarding the vacant director of finance position. I forced my face to remain perfectly blank. I had submitted my resume for the massive promotion 3 months prior, but the corporate bureaucracy had dragged the process to a complete halt. Tessa, I have managed hundreds of brilliant financial minds over my career, Karen continued, leaning forward. But I can count on one hand the number of people who possess your specific fusion of analytical brilliance and unshakable moral integrity. I blinked, thrown off guard. I'm sorry. That absolute circus at the Briarwood Country Club. She leaned back, a hint of awe in her voice. I stood on that balcony and watched you navigate a psychological minefield with absolute, chilling grace. You had every right to shatter glasses. You could have screamed until your lungs gave out. Instead, you laid out the empirical facts, maintained total emotional dominance, and walked out with your head held high. I promise you, I didn't feel very dominant in that moment. And that, she smiled warmly, is exactly what made it so spectacular. She slid a thick, watermarked document across the desk. It was an official corporate offer letter. The job is yours, Tessa. Director of Finance. It comes with a 32% base salary increase. You transition into the role the second you feel ready. I stared down at the massive number printed on the page and then looked back up at my boss. Karen, I honestly don't even have the words. Just say yes, sign the paper, and go pop some champagne with your friends, she laughed. You fought tooth and nail for this, Tessa. And not because of the trauma you survived, but because of the absolute sheer competence you displayed while surviving it. I clicked my pen and signed my name. As I walked out of her suite, a totally alien sensation bloomed inside my chest. It was pride. Not the frantic, desperate pride of a child begging her dad for a crumb of validation. It was an unshakable, concrete pride in the woman I had forged myself into. The forgotten girl who lived in the drainage ditch basement was officially a corporate director. The best comebacks never require an audience. It has been exactly 1 year since that night, and I am typing the script from my living room couch. It's the exact same modest apartment I escaped to, though I've finally upgraded to a real velvet sofa and hung some actual art on the walls. My living room window overlooks a sleepy, tree-lined avenue. When autumn rolls in, the maple leaves turn a fiery, brilliant orange and slowly drift down to the pavement. It is not a penthouse suite. It isn't going to end up in an architectural magazine. But absolutely no one is holding a financial gun to my head for the right to sleep here. No one is using my shelter as leverage to control my mind. It is mine. I remain strictly no contact with my parents. I genuinely do not know if they were forced to sell the beige colonial in Bryn Mawr, and honestly, I don't care to find out. Every 4 or 5 months, a sterile, legally drafted letter arrives from my mother's attorney, gently probing to see if I am open to a reconciliation mediation. I simply toss them into a manila folder and hand them to Lucia's firm. Her team responds with a cold, legally binding no. That is my absolute financial wall. Not a single cent flows in either direction. That is my absolute emotional wall. All communication is routed through paid professionals. If someone ends up in the ICU on life support, Lucia will let me know. Meredith actually managed to slip one email past my filters about 3 months ago. Tessa, I'm not consumed by the anger anymore. I think the fog has finally lifted, and I see what happened. I just desperately wish the timeline had played out differently. I am not sending this to demand your forgiveness. I just needed to put it in writing that I am profoundly sorry. Your sister, if you still want me to be. I haven't typed a reply. Not out of spite, and not because I want to punish her. I simply don't have the emotional vocabulary to address it yet. Maybe in 5 years, I will. Maybe I'll take it to my grave. Both options are completely valid. I spend my Sunday afternoons drinking tea and eating lemon cake with Mrs. Dot. She tells me vibrant, colorful stories about the neighborhood I grew up in, painting my childhood through a lens of warmth and kindness that my parents never possessed. I have an executive career that challenges me and a tribe of chosen friends who watched me crawl through absolute hell and never left my side. I have genuine, unfiltered peace. For the first 30 years of my life, I was brainwashed to believe that love was synonymous with endless suffering. I thought family meant blindly swallowing poison and calling it medicine. I thought enforcing personal boundaries was a selfish, toxic trait. I couldn't have been more wrong. Boundaries are not brick walls. They are windows. You have the absolute authority to decide when to slide them open, and you possess the ultimate power to decide who is worthy of looking inside. I am no longer the family punching bag. I am not a subterranean tenant. I am not an untaxed revenue stream, and I am certainly not a tragic cautionary tale. I am just Tessa. And for the first time in my life, that is more than enough. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this journey, thank you. From the bottom of my heart. This script was never about getting petty revenge. It is about ripping the veil off the truth. It's about the brutal realization that the people tasked with protecting your heart are sometimes the ones actively trying to break it. And it is about finding the raw, terrifying courage to stand up and scream, "I deserve better than this." If you are currently trapped in your own basement, whether it's a literal room or a psychological cage, I pray this story hands you a lifeline of hope. You are not asking for too much. You are not a burden. You are simply demanding to be treated like a human being. Make sure to hit subscribe if this story resonated with you, and dive into the description box below to check out my next video about a woman who unearthed her fiancé's 3 hidden offshore bank accounts. I'll see you all in the next one.